Welcome to the High Performance HVAC podcast. I am your host, Adam Mufich, and I am with a colleague of mine, David Richardson from NCI. Today is a special day. It's the first day of AHR 2026 in Las Vegas. Today we're joined with Todd Titus, who is the Director of State and Public Affairs from Hardi. Welcome, Todd.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I'm, excited to be here, excited to be in front of everybody else. AHR has a lot of fun atmosphere going on right now with everyone walking around, getting excited for getting the network, see everyone's booths and what's going on here.
Awesome. So, if there's contractors, we have a big listener base of contractors, and I think a lot of them might not be familiar with Hardi. Can you maybe give a background of who is Hardi and what is your role with Hardi?
Yeah, no, for sure. So Hardi, we're the distributor association representing wholesale distribution throughout national, international, and then at your state and local levels as well. So my role there is to handle the state advocacy. We have right now a 3-person advocacy team with our VP of Government Affairs, Alex Ayers, myself, and a Public Affairs Associate, Madison Romero. And we represent the distributor's interest and some associate other members. But working to really, my role is to focus on that state advocacy because we found that these environmental entities, adversaries to the interest of the industry, are really working against what's best for the products, the contractors, distributors, everybody throughout the industry right now.
It's I know a lot of times our industry, the contractors, are typically the silent victims in this, and they don't have a say. I know we're going to talk about how they can get involved a little bit later. How did you get involved doing this and end up at Hardi?
Yeah, no, it'll be in 10 days. It'll be 2 years at Hardi. I joined back in February of 2024 in the role. I was actually the first to have the role of working in state advocacy for Hardi. Okay. That's to the point of the leadership at Hardi to recognize what exactly was coming down the pipeline for all the issues and policy changes that were happening at the state level. Because in the past, the industry's been primarily affected at the federal level, setting the regulations, the standards, the efficiencies. But now states, whether it be political or otherwise, states are taking their destiny in their own hands, so to speak, and really trying to create policy at their level. And it's creating a patchwork in different kind of situations for each person, whether they think they're following the federal EPA standard or the DOE standard. And now all of a sudden their state does something that's more strict, and now they have to follow this new standard that they're just being blindsided by.
So in some of these, the planning hasn't really gone into it. It's been more of a reactive approach is what it sounds like.
Lately, yes. But there's definitely planning happening at the state level. There's organization. There's other entities, whether it be state energy offices coming together, whether it be environmental nonprofits coming together. They're having conversations and they're planning approaches, whether it be directly at the states, bringing the states in, or taking model policy and trying to get it implemented everywhere.
So what type of projects are you working on right now with Hardi?
Well, the big issue that I would say is affecting the entire industry at large, and it should be on everybody's radar, would be ultra-low GWP transitions that are forced upon the industry. We're trying to slow down that process and have realistic conversations about it, because the industry did a great job of collaborating and coming together to form the AIM Act, the technology transition rule, and all of these transitions of refrigeration and refrigerant that we're doing right now. We don't want to see that affected by state policy being concerned by what's going on with another transition that is completely unplanned by the industry and other federal regulators.
So you said something really interesting that stuck out to me. You said ultra-low GWP. Can you elaborate what that is?
Yeah, so everyone's aware of the A2L transition with your 700 and 150 GWP levels. States are going down to the ultra-low GWP. Specifically, New York, California, and Washington are either considering or have adopted a policy that's going to take you to a GWP of 10. That means industrial refrigerants will be the only refrigerant for every single sector. That means ammonia, propane, isobutane, carbon dioxide. These toxic, explosive, high-pressured refrigerants will be the only options. And if you do not have the ability for your technology in that sector, then you don't have a system. And that's what we're trying to explain, is temper what they're trying to do, explain that right now this is not feasible, and that you need to work on building good, efficient, compliant systems that are A2L compliant on the current transition and not going and exceeding expectations of ultra-low GWP.
It's a big change, especially since we're just kind of easing into A2Ls. Everyone's just getting used to that, and there's a push for a change. Is there like a time frame where?
Yeah. So right now, the two that don't really have a time frame. So look at California and Washington. Those do not have a time frame right now. Those are looking at right now task forces and studies that are being issued. So they each passed legislation. California was SB 1206. Washington was 1462. Each respectively to 2023, 2020, and last year in 2025. Those are each creating virgin refrigerant bans that will eventually completely ban virgin A2L refrigerants. And then on top of that, they're creating task forces and issuing studies that are going to look into the feasibility for ultra-low GWP. Now, the one thing that we need to always keep in mind about when we hear a study is that studies from groups and entities like this can sometimes get skewed if we do not have proper representation on these task forces. So we're always working, and right now we're monitoring the task force creation in Washington to make sure that the industry is actually represented properly so we can have a good study that we can rely on for this process in that area. Because we don't know exactly how this one's going to pan out in California. This was before we really started focusing on state advocacy at the kind of detailed level that the entire industry is doing right now. But then we look over and we pan over to New York. New York adopted Part 494 back in December of 24. It actually was released on Christmas Eve. If that doesn't give you an initial reaction of like, wow, are you trying to put something under the rug? You should have that kind of reaction.
Right.
Because it was signed by the governor on December 9th and then released to the public on Christmas Eve. So it took everyone a bit back. But what that rule did was then on January 9th, which this got changed, so you don't immediately have a reaction here of people thinking they're not compliant. But if it had stayed how it was, on January 9th, it would have immediately banned 404A and 507A in supermarkets. Now, if you're not familiar with those refrigerants are the two most common for supermarkets when you think about your racks and refrigeration systems. That means every single rack would have to have a reclaimed version of that immediately if that rule had gone into place.
Wow.
Whoa. So they would have completely crippled the supermarket refrigeration market in 2 weeks.
Yeah,
in
but
the state of New York.
Instead we've worked and we've gotten enforcement discretion put into place several times because they keep delaying with these little miniature delays to the point that now it's actually going to go into effect at the end of March. And they've told us they don't really want to have any other enforcement discretions for that topic or for that refrigerant. So at the end of March, 404A and 507A in New York have to be reclaimed. And that is a market that does not have much, if any, reclaim available.
From what you're saying, it sounds like there hasn't been a whole lot. They haven't engaged the refrigeration, mechanical, and the HVAC contractors when they're making these decisions.
Well, they did have us engaged. We've met with the governor's office twice. We met with the DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation, who implemented the regulation several times. We gave verbal and written comments, but instead they essentially brushed the entire industry off.
Wow!
Because we explained to them we cannot comply, we cannot do this. It is physically impossible to follow this regulation as you guys have it written, and they ignored us. But I haven't even gotten to the absolute worst part of this regulation, and then you're already concerned. I can see it on your faces. Yeah. Is the worst part of the regulation is the ultra-low GWP. Beginning in 2027 and completing by 2034, you're not going to be able to implement your A2Ls eventually. Like it's residential systems, and by 2034 have to be ultra-low GWP or use reclaim A2L refrigerant.
And that's in 3 different states as of right now?
Just New York. The other 2 are exploring it, but we expect to have similar policies there. Unless, obviously, we're successful in our advocacy.
So right now, if we're talking about, we're looking at refrigerants like natural refrigerants, right? Propane or isobutane in that. There's a charge limit on a lot of, and we see this in residential systems like a refrigerator or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. But there's a charge limit right now? How are they going to get around that?
Yeah, so that's the thing that's so interesting is like even if the technology can operate with the pressures and the type of refrigerant it is, it's the building and safety standards. So, for example, propane. Propane is something that we're all used to seeing it and having it in our homes. When there's a leak, we're all used to that rotten egg smell,
right?
That odorant that gets placed in propane for home infrastructure. Well, when you put that into your system, and if it is to circle around in the closed loop and run through the compressor, when it goes through the compressor, the odorant is naturally removed. We have not been able to properly find a way with technology to keep the odorant in the propane. So that means in your apartment or home, if your system then leaks, if your furnace or heat pump that is running on this now then leaks, you have no idea what's going on. You have no idea that there's a propane leak. It's all filling your home. That pounds and pounds of refrigerant on that leak is circulating, whether it be adjacent or directly into the home. That's dangerous. People evacuate buildings, evacuate homes, and told to get as far away as possible for just small amounts of that from the infrastructure that they can smell. And that it's only bound to have an explosive reaction before we realize it's too late and lives are lost. All in the sense of environmental NGOs and state regulators to improve a minor 500 GWP.
So I'm going to, ask a question kind of on the flip side of the coin. And I'm, because I've heard, there's always talks about evolving technologies in that. I think, you hear whispers around that in the future, we're going to look at reverse cycle chillers and like self-contained units outside of the homes, right? Do you think that's where they're looking to go, where there's no refrigerant actually moving or stored inside of the house?
I don't even think they've gotten that far. They based a lot of this stuff based on the CLCPA back in the Climate Leadership Protection Act back in New York back in 2019. And then from that, they issued a scoping plan in 2022 that then followed by like I'm talking about these studies and reports. They then had a study and report called an Effect Terror Report. In this Effect Terror Report, it specifically says there's a box that talks about technology for industrial refrigerants. Mm-hmm. This box, it says, there is no technology available for ultra-low GWP refrigerants. But guess what? They still went through with it. It explained, you cannot comply with this. The technology does not exist to comply with this. They still adopted it. Wow. So to answer your question, I don't think that they're thinking that far ahead because I don't think they care. They believe that if they adopt a policy, the technology will be forced to catch up, and that's how the technology will exist. When I firmly don't believe that. In my opinion, the technology will drive the policy. The policy will not drive the technology.
Right. One of the things I'm putting my contractor hat back on here, and I'm trying to think, caught in the middle of this. They're not going to be able to serve their customers at all. It's a catch-22 situation if this continues on.
Yeah, it's a physical and financial harm to every. So what we were talking about New York as the example, so I'll just stick with New York to New Yorkers. So we're talking about the refrigerant ban and how that's immediately going into effect to require ultra-low GWP in 2027. So the virgin ban will then happen, but then it'll eventually you'll have to adopt the policy for the refrigerant you're going to go to. Otherwise, you're not going to make an investment to something that you then are immediately going to have to change again. So March 31st, the virgin ban goes into effect for 404A and 507A. That means every supermarket that is not already using industrial refrigerants will have to transition to an ultra-low refrigerant. So every rack system, so look, everyone's been to the grocery store. You can see if you don't work in that space, you can imagine what a rack looks like where you pick up your produce. One of those racks are estimated to be, from conversation I've had, about $250,000. Wow. And then if you do an entire grocery store, you're looking at upwards of $2 million plus to do a full transition for one grocery store. So if you think about that cost hitting a grocery store and doing things like that, prices are going to go up. Stores might not have the overhead. Mm-hmm. If you don't have the additional cost at the end of the day to afford that, you're going to create food deserts in upstate New York. You're going to create closed bodegas in the boroughs. People are going to have long trips just in order to get their supplies. Or if they just stop selling refrigeration, then why are people going to go there? Because I always try to use the analogy of if I can't go somewhere to get my milk, I'm not also going to buy my cereal.
Right.
So I'm just going to go somewhere else. So because people in New York, if you don't know, they're driving 45 minutes for groceries in upstate New York. Their food deserts is a serious problem there. And all of a sudden, if you close one of those grocery stores because they can't comply or have to take out a loan just to implement a refrigeration system, now people are going to be driving upwards of maybe an hour or more.
So what I'm hearing you say is this is not only going to affect contractors and also their customers. It's also going to have an impact on the economy as a whole.
Right. And if you play into the name of the podcast and everything, think about it from an efficiency standpoint. I've been talking about this commercial and supermarket. Now let's flip this to residential. A residential home system, if you're not going to have building codes or safety standards, I don't see it feasible by 2034 to have a propane or ammonia system that will have that will allow in a residential heat pump. Because you got to keep in mind, places like New York, they're doing electrification with fossil fuel bans in buildings that are 7 stories below and over. Now, granted, that has legal action that it's going through, but if that doesn't hold true and they stick with the district court decision, they're all of a sudden not going to be able to build buildings. So if you build a building that's over 7 stories or under 7 stories by that point, and then all of a sudden you put in a GWP below 10, you have to do carbon dioxide if it even exists by that point because of the size with the pressure. But the point is you have to have a safety standard that's going to allow it. So propane, isobutane, ammonia, those aren't allowed under safety standards or building codes. So you have several hoops that are not aligning with everything else.
Right. And
what that leaves you with now is a plug-and-play electric heater or maybe a window unit that are going to be forced to be used because otherwise they're going to be in the middle of summer with dealing with the heat, or you're going to be in the middle of winter dealing with the cold. I've heard stories about someone that had to already not comply with New York's differential for their outdoor condensing units. They had to cross state lines to buy a system illegally and install it illegally because a 91-year-old lady had a home at 32 degrees and New York would not allow them to install the system and save the lady's life. So a HVACR industry worker went against the grain and installed a system just to save the lady's life.
Wow.
And that's the kind of incompetence that we're dealing with and facing against because they will not recognize what they're doing is costing people's lives, wallets, and just putting people in unnecessary danger.
And I can see that being a decision that more contractors are going to have to make. Do you comply or do you do the right thing for your customers? I can see that really taking off and becoming a source of debate.
Yeah, I mean, the argue even becomes, do I install this because I know that it's putting their lives in danger, even if it was compliant and existed?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I've been thinking about this whole time as you've been talking about this is who holds the liability to all this? Because there's obviously going to be issues where somebody's going to get hurt, right? Especially if it's not fully thought through and it's not a thoughtful process, right? So who's liable? Is it the contractor? Is it the manufacturer? Is it the state? Who's going to be liable for all this stuff?
It's going to be a complicated situation, that's for sure. I mean, no one's going to know until you have a case study. Unfortunately, that's a trial by fire situation because that's that kind of stuff that hasn't been put out there. You think about liability. That kind of brings to another thought of financial harm. Is obviously we represent the distributors, and when we think about ultra low GWP, I'm now thinking about storing. I think about the pounds of refrigerant that they store in order to have available for the contractors to purchase in their warehouses. So now all of a sudden, if that becomes toxic ammonia, explosive propane, and these kinds of combinations, what kind of insurance is a distributor going to have to pay, and what kind of cost does that mean it's going to be passed down to the contractor? Because that's the way it's going to work. Because the entire industry, whether it be a manufacturer, distributor, or contractor, everyone runs a lean business. There's not a lot of fat to be cut off there.
Right.
So when you add regulatory costs and red tape and other situations, you're just hurting the customer at the end of the day, and people don't see that the supply chain is where the money gets passed through.
Yeah, it has a direct impact on all the contractors because of cost, and that ultimately is passed on to their customers, the end user, which if we're talking about comfort cooling, if you look at just the past 5, 6, 7 years, the pricing has gone up exponentially. It's becoming, I remember 20 years ago, air conditioning it's not really a luxury anymore. Everyone has it, right? I feel like we're getting back to the point where it's starting to become a luxury again. We're going to get there.
Well, that just circles right back to the story that I said about the 91-year-old lady. It's not a luxury anymore. We have adapted. Society's changed. This entire expo, everything we're looking at, the reason of all this here, this is essential. Go back to COVID. Who was essential?
Yeah.
I mean, it all comes back to that. Everybody in this room is important to keeping their customers alive at the end of the day. And if people don't see that, that's just an issue on their end, because this entire industry is essential.
I'm thinking about the struggles and the obstacles that our industry has gone through with the A2L transition, and I'm trying to envision a plan to see that, looking forward, how in the world, with all the obstacles that we just came through and overcame and are still overcoming, are we going to be able to do this in such a quick period of time, when with the 410A transition, some of us lived through the 22 to 410A. I know some of you guys in the audience probably remember that, the 410A to 22 to 410A transition. That was a struggle, and it took us a long time. We fast-tracked the 410 to the A2Ls, and now fast-tracking this even more. I'm almost having a panic attack thinking about this.
Well, let's think about actually, every transition is going to have its bumps in the road, situations like that.
Sure.
But generally, the industry did a very good job with the A2L transition.
Yes.
And it's quickly being adopted. I think last stat I heard, we're up on over 80% of adoption per installs and things like that. It's going really well. But what's the difference between that transition and this ultra low?
Right.
For starters, the industry is on board and was actually leading the charge for A2L, for the A2L transition. This ultra low, we've tried to be involved, but they're not letting us. They're not listening to the reason of the industry or the concerns of the industry. We're explaining feasibility. We're explaining what technology actually exists. But they would rather point to some monoblock system in Europe and say, pick that up and install that here. That's not how it works. And when we try to explain that to them, they shrug us off and they move on and point back to their own research and own invested studies that skew the results to make themselves sound right.
Wow. Yeah, I'm kind of thinking about, all of the education that needed to happen for A2Ls, and a lot of contractors really waited to the last minute. This is going to be a whole nother level if it goes through. Like, this is serious education that needs to happen, because it's going to be a shift in the way you do everything, and it's going to be a necessity. It has to happen. And I look at, I've always had a residential background, but as far as residential goes, the lack of education out there is stifling. So how are we going to overcome that?
Well, for starters, it would help if the product actually existed, right? So
Yeah.
you could actually train off of something.
Good point.
But let's take a step back from that for a second and think about going to the 70s and 80s. 70s and 80s, ammonia was actually used as a refrigerant. There's a person I talked to that was a distributor, so he had to move to a desk side of it. He used to be a contractor. He worked on a system that was in a basement. Did not know from the homeowner that it was an ammonia system, just knew that the system was not working. Walks down into the basement. If you don't know, ammonia is a very heavy chemical, so if there's a leak, it sits down. It does not disperse as easily. So it's sitting down in the basement. He had no idea. He walks down the basement, takes one breath, collapses, luckily is enough to able to crawl himself out of it and get up the stairs, but has permanent lung damage, no longer can be a contractor, and moves to being a distributor because he can handle that, the desk side of it.
So you're looking at monitoring systems that have to be in place with this, in addition to the training and technology that on a residential scale doesn't exist yet.
I don't want to say that we're looking at additional regulations.
Okay.
Let's not say that we're really going to add things for the contractor to do. The contractors have enough to worry about right now. You guys are already complying with crazy regulations as is. But instead, the state would rather start putting lives at risk. Because when we talk about propane, obviously explosive, obviously no odorant placed on there. We talk about ammonia. I just gave you an example.
Right.
Deathly off one inhalation. And then we're going to put that with families being raised inside homes or inside your grocery stores where you're shopping, and all of a sudden you're going to pass out and die from collapsing from that? No. And then all of a sudden you think about CO2. I know we haven't really talked about CO2, but that's mainly because it is actually being implemented in some places. Supermarkets do have CO2, but that's that cost that I was talking about earlier. They're very expensive, and efficiency does become a factor with those. It's really only shown true success in certain climates, because a carbon dioxide system runs at extremely high PSI. Mm-hmm. So think about your current systems operating about 230, 240 PSI. Then you're going to jump over to a carbon dioxide system. You're operating about 2,300 PSI, something like that. if you don't know how high PSI that is, that's enough pressure to crush a nuclear submarine.
Wow.
And that's just shy about
Incredible.
400 or 500 PSI of what a nuclear meltdown is. If you think about 3 Mile Island back in the 80s in Pennsylvania,
Right.
yeah, that caused that 2,800 PSI. So the efficiency becomes the important part. And then it becomes leaks. Because if you're running at that kind of pressure and you have a leak at a supermarket, you're blowing the whole charge. Then now all of a sudden you're thinking about CO2 exposure to produce. You're thinking about CO2 exposure to the residents. There's been numerous articles throughout the country about people who have installed CO2 systems, primarily Whole Foods, Aldi's, all these other supermarkets where it's really common. But some of these supermarkets are having these blown charges, and they're calling fire departments because they think it's a gas leak because the entire store is filled with CO2 all of a sudden. And then all of a sudden the supermarket's closed for the day. They have to hope they can get a charge in there quick enough, or all of a sudden all the produce is gone, and now they have a dead inventory. So it's in the mind of the regulators, doing the right thing has no cost. You're doing the right thing. You're improving the environment. You're lowering the GWP. But us, on the other hand, are saying, no, there's a feasibility, there's a technology, and there's a safety concern, whether it be physical or financial, that has to be taken into account.
Right.
This is it's a lot to digest. I didn't even know any of this stuff was going on. I'm learning
No.
about this today. We had a conversation a few minutes beforehand, and I'm like, my mind is blown. And at first, I always looked at Hardi. I didn't even really know what Hardi was before. And I looked at Hardi like, okay, well, you really represent the distributors and the wholesalers, right? But to me, what I'm hearing is, you're kind of representing everybody,
Well,
the end user even, right?
Yeah, when you're in the middle of the supply chain, you're in a unique position. Because at the end of the day, when I advocate for contractors, because they're the customers to my members. I'm interested in manufacturers because manufacturers are who my distributors buy from. But at the same time, both have great representation with great associations that we all work closely with, and we have a great collaboration going on at the federal level for all of these things. And that actually became a part of another side thing that we were working on, building those same relationships at the state level. There's contractor associations that are in each state, and we now have to work, now that we have a state department, to make sure that we're building those relationships, building those coalitions, making sure the industry's on the same page at the state level. And then so much so that now local levels we're seeing issues there. So we're actually expanding once again in our advocacy department, and we're hiring a code specialist because the code person is going to be in charge of making sure that cities and towns and counties aren't adopting things that are going to be adversarial to the industry, whether that be ultra-low GWP, building codes, or possibly even fossil fuel bans. Because we believe the consumer choice is a really important thing, that contractors have to be sure that they're able to provide whatever the customer wants and not be restricted and get blamed for something they didn't do.
Right. Wow.
Wow. So you guys, you're really representing everybody. That's awesome to hear. How can, how does a contractor actually make their voice known, and how do they help out?
Yeah, we realized the most powerful thing in the industry, whether you be manufacturer, distributor, or contractor, is actually, the voices of the people with their boots on the ground. So we invested in getting the time to creating what Hardi calls the Grassroots Advocacy Center. It's on our website, hardinet.org. Go under the Advocacy tab, the Advocacy tab, and click on Grassroots Advocacy Center. And it will pull up every grassroots campaign that is currently open. And you can click on it. They're all open. This is public. This is not restricted to Hardi members. And you can go on there, click on any campaign that is within your jurisdiction or territory that you serve, whether you be a manufacturer, distributor, or contractor. You click on it. It'll ask you to put in your information. So you put in your name, the address, whether it be home or business, but that address will use who they reach out to for your elected officials. So whether that, if you want to separate, make sure you're getting the one that you're actually a home constituent of, use that. But and then there's a drop-down arrow where you would distinguish whether you're a manufacturer, contractor, or distributor. You move on to the next tab, you hit submit, and it opens up a pre-made message. So if you don't feel confident in your abilities to write something to express your concerns, it pre-makes one for you. and we make sure whatever it loads automatically is good enough for you to submit and get the concerns across. But there's absolutely room to edit it. We invite people to edit it, tailor it, personalize it however you see fit. Put in your name, talk about your business. Maybe there's additional concerns you have that aren't said there, but then you edit it how you want, hit submit, and I just described a process that probably takes less than 5 minutes, and now you just help the industry.
So for everyone listening to this, that's how they should get involved, especially in the 3 states that we've been discussing.
Right, and we have campaigns for all of those at the federal and state and local levels. So, I recommend saving the tab. I recommend visiting it frequently, maybe once a week. Set a time off to just, I'm going to open this. I'm going to look at it, see if there's anything I need to fill out. Because if you take the time to fill out, you're making a difference. I know you might not think like little old me and a little town in New York or anything like that. Because think of people in upstate New York. Their entire lives are being ripped apart. Businesses changed all because of decisions down in New York City.
Right.
That's just the fact of the matter. Making your voices heard, taking the small amount of time out of your day to do little things like that makes huge dividends.
Excellent point.
Now I know, some of these states like California, a lot of times they implement things and then it kind of trickles down through a lot of other states, right? So do you see there being a risk of other states following if this starts going through? And is there talk in other states right now that you know of?
Yeah, it's actually a huge problem. That's why Hardi is actually filed with a joint lawsuit with AHRI. We're in a legal battle with over this ultra-low GWP problem in New York because it's actually been adopted. So we are in a lawsuit over that. Little small update for it. We lost the initial one. So New York has their levels of court go. Supreme Court is actually the lowest court. Then it's appellate court, and then you have the I think it's the. I'll get that one back to you, just based on it. But then you have, beyond that, the New York courts. Then you get to the U.S. Supreme Court. Okay. Right now, we have appealed up to the appellate court. So we'll have a panel go through all of that. And we'll hopefully by the end of the year have a new ruling, hopefully in our favor, since we did lose the initial one. Not to dive into it, but they pointed into a variance process as being the reason for why they chose to side with New York on it. Completely disagree with that opinion, and that's expressed in our appeal. But we're working on making sure taking legal action. We're also taking legislative action. Senate Bill 9066 and Assembly Bill 9596 out in New York are bills that we're working to push to try to be adopted in New York, and there will be grassroots campaigns like what we talked about with that. Okay. And I started rambling about making sure that information got out there, and I completely lost your question.
I was just wondering. That's fine. I forget a lot of time too what I'm talking about, but no, I'm wondering about other states. Are other states trying to follow, or will they follow?
Yes, thank you. It's a policy practice called the California Wave, and it used to be California, and they would adopt a policy, and you'd see it slowly sweep across the nation like a wave. Now we're seeing it pop up not only in California but in New York. They are the clear 2 leaders in creating, call it adversarial policy that's just very negative to the industry and is causing more regulations, more red tape, more bureaucracy to get involved with our everyday business. So the big concern too, on top of this wave practice that is happening, is we're actually seeing environmental nonprofits making public presentations and then load them on the internet about how they identify states that they are going to go around to and try to make A3 refrigerants legal under the building codes, because they understand that the reason why their ultra-low GWP battle is losing is because they're not legal products that they're saying are alternatives. They're not alternatives if they are illegal. I think we can all agree on that.
Right.
And they recognize that that's a problem with their argument. So now they've identified, if you're familiar with the U.S. Climate Alliance, they're essentially those states.
Okay.
And they've identified them on a map. They've said what they're going to do, and they're going to go around and they're going to go state by state, investing a lot of money into lobbyists, pockets, and making sure that they can get those A3 refrigerants and industrial refrigerants approved in the building codes so they can adopt their very strict policies.
So how do we get in front of this?
Yeah.
So being aware. That's what your advocates for your associations are, such as Hardi and myself. Being aware of that, and then what we do is we need the participants for the Grassroots Advocacy Center. We are having as many advocacy days as we can possibly have. I think this year we're taking 6 or 7 states, and we're taking members out into these states to meet with their elected officials, and going out there and we're having these meetings, and we're explaining the concerns we have, whether it be ultra low GWP, PFAS, fossil fuel bans, all of these different things to make sure that they are aware of what's coming down the pipeline. You talk to big associations that create model policy that protects the industry, making sure they're trying to be preemptive the best that we can, because so often the industry is reactive. We're always reacting to what the states are doing or the government's doing. So we're trying to be ahead of that. But then you go and you look about kind of repetitive, but like the Grassroots Advocacy Center. Once we are aware of an issue, we put it on there, we make sure it's available, and we ask for participation, because if we can then point to saying we have 300 contractors throughout the country that disagree with this, that's huge. We ran a campaign on a different topic, so it's called ASME boiler pressure vessel. There was a separate issue we worked with AHR on. We ran a grassroots campaign. This is usually a very small policy code work. The industry set the record for the entire ASME of most public comments ever submitted on an issue.
Wow.
And that was said during the voting process that helped us delay it to the next code cycle. Like, everyone in this room's voice matters. It's more than just a numbers game. It's a quality of comment. It's a quality of your business. It's a quality of recognizing that we're essential. It's important that everyone participates, and the more people we can get to participate, the better. It's a small 5 minutes out of your day, and it helps me, it helps the industry so much.
Now, let me ask you this. I know you guys have a big connection, obviously, with all the distributors and wholesalers, right? And you might be a little bit disconnected with contractors. Have you thought about approaching, your members in Hardi, the distributors and wholesalers, and trying to get them involved to communicate this with the contractor?
Absolutely. We have done that. We are doing that. We for the New York one, for example, if your distributor has not shared it with you, talking about the Part 494 grassroots campaign from Hardi, go ask them. I'm perfectly fine with that. Go ask your distributor, why haven't I gotten this email? I know they have it. But, I don't blame them for not sending it out, because they can be busy too. Right. It happens. But it's there. It's available. If you don't want to take the time to do that, just go to the Grassroots Advocacy Center, and we already have it there.
Sounds like some great first steps. I appreciate having you on, Todd. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap everything up?
I would. Well, first off, thank you guys for having me on. I really appreciate it. I think this is you kind of said you didn't really know too much about ultra low, and I think there's a lot of people that aren't aware of ultra low GWP and the conversation around it, and how this needs to be a technology driven policy, a technology driven transition. We aren't for another transition. We worked way too hard since the 90s and 2000s and all the way up to 2020 with the AIM Act to work on the transition we have now, to have it be patchwork and ripped apart by these, whether it be NGOs or what have you, that were not involved in the process, that now believe that the industry was told to do the A2L when we actually led it. That I think that's a big thing, and I think we all need to be giving ourselves a big pat on the back, and really, really appreciate how well we are all handling this situation, because so often a transition is difficult. So often, difficulties can happen, like the ultra-low GWP stuff. Right. But we actually successfully created one. We are successfully executing one, and people don't recognize that enough. And the fact that this is something that the industry created, implemented, and led on themselves, and weren't told to do it by the DOE or EPA. We worked with them from the beginning and told them to help regulate ourselves. People forget that. And that's what we kind of need to remind people, is when they try to tell us to do a patchwork or tell us to do ultra-low GWP, why? We are already doing great things. We are already below 700 GWP in transitioning. The jump, we're going from like 2,200 GWP to 700. 1,500 might not sound like a ton, but in reality, it is a large number. And the risk of the physical and financial harm, the dangers that it will bring, the businesses that will be hurt. That's not something that I think is worth that worth that small dividend until it's absolutely possible and necessary to start to execute.
Yeah, that trickle-down and compounding effect that you stated, that was something that really stood out to me, is we've not thought out the consequences. Or well, not we, but they have not thought out the consequences.
If you're involved with that, we need to talk.
Yeah, they have not thought out because of all the parties involved. That was one of the biggest takeaways I had from our conversation.
Yeah, no, it's another thing we didn't even brush on would be like the water heater side of it and pool heaters. There's going to be a change coming up with those in 2020, 27, 28. Well, in 2027, those all of a sudden have to start being ultra low GWP.
Mm-hmm.
You want to start to implement those water heaters that don't exist with those refrigerants?
I feel like it's becoming a trend where let's change the policy and figure it out after the fact. Like, let's just throw something at the wall and see if it sticks, right?
Right, and it goes back to the electrification of New York. They're requiring electrification, so you have to do a heat pump water heater. And then all of a sudden, they say, okay, but it also has to be ultra-low GWP. Okay, well, there is no heat pump water heater that is ultra-low GWP. So we're just going to remove all warm or hot water from New York.
Yeah, or you're going to see people do what, in the one example you had, they're going to start crossing state lines, and they're going to go under the radar.
And that's policy should not create bad actors. It should not recommend bad actors. It shouldn't do things like that. And if it does, that's just a sign of bad policy, and that's why we took legal action.
Yep.
But people need to be paying attention to what's going on in their states because it's coming. We know it is, whether it be the electrification stuff, refrigerant stuff. They're all having issues pop up everywhere of different kinds of things. But ultra low GWP is coming. It's already now on the West Coast. It's in New York. There's a lot of states in the Northeast that like to copy New York. So I would not be surprised if in the next year or two, if not, maybe this year, there's some kind of regulation that gets filed in the Northeast that's mirroring that. Mm-hmm. Because I expect 2027 will be the year that California attempts to do it. And I think 2028 will be the year that Washington will attempt to do it. And in between now and then is easily could see somewhere in the Northeast that likes to copy New York.
So if you're a contractor and you're listening to this, now is the time to make your voice heard.
And don't think the Midwest and the West are off the hook. Colorado has its own difficulties, and there's places that copy Colorado that are out west.
Wow. Well, thank you, Todd. Really appreciate having you on. I'd love to have you back as a follow-up, maybe in a couple months. Let's check in and see where we're at. I encourage anyone listening to get involved and make their voice heard so we actually have a decision in what's happening in the future of HVAC, right? But once again, Todd Titus, Director of State and Public Affairs, I appreciate you.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on, guys.